This happened a long time ago, so I apologize if some things do not seem clear. I've removed this experience from my memory for reasons that will become obvious, but now I've decided to tell people what happened, because I realize it's not something I should hide. Me and my brother Ron were home alone, and we were in my room watching the NFL on TV. We were screaming at the screen whenever our team did something stupid. We were 40 minutes into the game. The quarterbacks were messing around, and out of frustration, Ron slammed his fist into the remote, turning off the television by accident. I said, "What the hell?" and turned the TV back on. As the screen loaded back up, we heard fast-paced footsteps downstairs. Ron and I quickly turned our heads to the bedroom door. I turned down the volume so we could hear the noises more clearly. "I think someone's inside," Ron said. I could hear the stutter in his voice. He was anxious. "No, it's probably just the dog," I replied. Ron, however, was a lot more cautious. He walked over to the door and locked it. Then I realized that the click it made would have alerted the intruder, if there was one. At the time, though, I brushed it off as the Jack Russell Terrier. But we heard more footsteps. Ron whispered, "That's not the dog." Ron being nervous put me on edge, so I agreed with him, and we turned off the bedroom lights. Ron ran around the room, trying to find some sort of object that we could use as a weapon. I sat next to the door, with my ear placed on the wall. The doors were thin, so if there was anyone inside the house, I would hear. Nothing happened. It was just dead silence. Ron had his phone ready, in case we needed to dial 911. I laid on my chest and looked through the gap under the bedroom door. I didn't notice anything at first, but on closer inspection, I could just barely make out a pair of faded boots down the upstairs hall. I felt my hands shaking as I pushed myself back up to my feet. I tiptoed over to Ron, who was waiting anxiously for information. "Someone's here," I whispered as low as I could. Ron's face went pale, and he stared into nothingness. At one point, I thought he was going to black out on me. I pulled Ron over to our window. I quietly opened it and looked down to the grass, 2 stories below. Ron was still in a different world, as if he'd blocked himself out from reality, leaving the responsibility to me. I tried not to pay much attention to him, and instead focused on our escape. I took Ron's phone out of his hand as he crouched on the carpet. He had installed one of those apps where only specific fingerprints could enter the phone. I took his hand, which was shockingly cold, and held his pointer finger onto the screen. I jumped out of my skin when the phone let out a loud beep, and all of a sudden, I could hear the footsteps running straight to the bedroom door. I quickly typed in 911 and put one leg out the window. I heard loud thumps on my bedroom door and shouting. He was shouting, "I'm going to kill you." I climbed out the window and landed on the porch roof. Then I shouted back to Ron for him to follow me. Ron stood up quickly and stumbled out the window. He landed on the roof beside me, and I forced the window shut again. "We need to jump," I said. I could hear faint thumping behind the walls. He was struggling to get into our room. I jumped off the porch roof and sprained my ankle. Ron was wobbling on the edge, clearly hesitant. "Quick," I whispered. I avoided shouting because the intruder would have known that we were outside. Ron touched his chest, head, right shoulder, and left shoulder, making the cross, and then he jumped. He rolled when he landed on the ground, and when he got up, he rubbed his neck, and then we ran away. We had run a good 6 blocks before I realized that we had left the dog behind. Suddenly, I heard a faint voice in my jean pocket. I pulled out the phone and heard a woman asking if we were still there. It was the 911 operator. I told her that we needed the cops immediately, and she told us to stay on the line and that the cops were en route to the house. I burst into tears from what had just happened, but my main concern was for my dog. I talked to the operator as both me and Ron slowly walked back to the house. We heard the siren and felt weight lifted from our shoulders. I sat in my chair on the porch with Ron in a squat position beside me. We were both waiting anxiously to come face to face with the intruder. 4 cops came out, but they didn't have the guy. They did, however, have Lewis. Lewis was my dog. I stood up and took him from the officer, holding him close. I kissed his head and patted his back. I sat back down in the chair and placed Lewis on my lap, still hugging him and apologizing for leaving him behind. The cops explained that there was no one inside, and there was nothing stolen either. In fact, they explained that there was nothing that would have proven someone had invaded our property at all. They never found the guy, but I can assure you, I haven't had a good night's sleep ever since. Every night I lock my door and keep my dog with me in my room. Ron installed some CCTV cameras in the house not long after, and ever since, nothing similar has happened. My name is Kyle, and I live in a haunted house in Edmonton, Alberta. My mom and brother thought so anyway. I used to be skeptical that the house was haunted. That is until something happened to me personally. I'm 19 now, but this story took place when I was 17, in the middle of August. First off, I'll tell you some of the events that happened to my mom and brother before the event that happened to me. My mom and brother have both had cases of sleep paralysis in the house, which has never happened to me before we moved there. They both told me that their experiences went like this. They felt like someone was slowly pushing down or sitting on their chests while they were sleeping, and they'd wake up with no one on top of them. They were unable to speak or move, which is quite scary when you think about it. Another thing that has happened to both my mom and my brother is that while they were sleeping in their beds, something would suddenly yank off the covers and scare the absolute crap out of them. My brother has had this happen to him multiple times, whereas my mom has only had it happen to her once. Now that you know the prior events, I'll tell my story. It was the weekend, and my mom had left to take my brother to soccer practice, while I was home in my room playing video games with my buddy online. After we had stopped playing, I turned off Discord and said goodbye. Then I turned off my PC and sat on my bed. I opened up YouTube to watch some videos, because my favorite YouTuber had just posted. While I was laying on my bed, I heard some noises from the kitchen. It sounded like dishes in the sink rattling. That was odd, because I was home alone at the time. I sat there for a while listening, and then I began to hear the cabinets being opened and closed. I was naive at the time, and I just figured it was my mom and brother back early from soccer. So I peeked my head around the corner and walked down the hall to see if anyone was there. To my shock, it wasn't them. Instead, I saw a black mist-like shadow person standing at the end of the hall that leads to the kitchen. I was in complete awe of what I was seeing, and I just stood there looking at the thing, unable to process what was in front of me. After what seemed like a minute or two, I dipped back into my room and slammed the door shut. I pressed my whole body against it to keep it closed. I remembered that my phone was on my bed, so I slid over to it and texted my mom. I asked her what to do. She told me to get out of that house and go stay with a friend until she gets back home with my brother. I looked out my door and down the hallway to see if the coast was clear. Lucky for me, it was. I gathered all my courage and grabbed my longboard. Then I booked it down the hall and out the front door of my house. I grabbed my shoes on the way and stopped at the end of the driveway to put them on. Then I plopped my longboard on the ground and started off, almost wiping out on the way. I rode over to my friend's house who was previously playing games with me. Once I got there, he let me in and I told him what I saw. To my surprise, he actually believed me. He told me that one time when he was staying at my house, he saw something similar in the kitchen. He woke up in the middle of the night on the couch, which was in the living room next to the kitchen. He saw a dark figure standing in there, staring down the hallway towards the bedrooms. Apparently he thought it was a dream, since he was still half asleep and groggy. So he didn't say anything about it the next day. He just went on with whatever we were doing. Once my mom had gotten home, we decided to enter the house. As soon as we stepped inside, we could tell that someone or something had been there, because all the dishes were out of place and the cabinets were hanging open. We decided not to stay the night there, and we went to our cousin's place instead. They lived 15 minutes away in Sherwood Park. When we got home, everything was back to normal, except that the lights in the house were on. Ever since this happened, I've been a firm believer in ghosts and the supernatural. This just happened an hour ago, and I'm still spooked. Me and my best friend were home alone, and we had been for a while. Every time he comes over, we go to the woods by my house, and it's normally uneventful. We would throw some rocks and break some sticks, harmless fun, but this time, something else happened. We went outside to go to the woods, and nothing much happened on the way, but when we got there, something was off. Everything was dark, tons of trees had been knocked down, and the entire place was not like I remembered it. We kept going anyway, still having our usual harmless fun. At one point, my friend turned to me and said that we should go back. I looked at my phone to check the time, and I saw that we'd only been there for 30 minutes. I wanted to stay longer, because it would be a few hours before anyone would want us back home. We continued on, finding strange things, like an old crushed Mountain Dew can, probably 10 or 20 years old, and a toy boat that had been completely destroyed by wind and water. It was probably even older than the can. Our plan was to go further in than we had ever been before, which wouldn't be very hard for us, because we hadn't been that deep. After walking for a while, we came to a landmark that I knew. It marked the deepest point that I'd ever been in the woods. It was a bridge built on a log that had fallen over a river in the middle of the forest. I had seen it before, however, one thing was different. There was something sitting on top of it. It was small, and it resembled the head of an animal. When we got closer and got a good view of it, I could tell that it was a deer skull, pearly white and clean, sitting on the bridge. I had no clue who put it there, and where the rest of the deer was. On the other side of the river, there was a huge hill with a creepy small house on top of it. When we were looking around, I heard a creak or some kind of high-pitched noise from up towards it. We got spooked and began to run. I could hear my friend scream behind me. We both kept running, and once we reached the edge of the woods, we stepped onto the road. I asked him why he screamed, and he said that he heard footsteps next to him. We quickly made our way home, and when we got there, the garage door was open. Not knowing if it was left open or not, we ran inside and locked the door. I checked the house and turned the alarm on. We were still home alone, and I wished my parents would come back. Now we're still sitting here, and it's been nearly 2 hours since. I can't shake the feeling of fear that those eerie woods left me with.